Hello, good afternoon. This is Mildred Barya with Malaprops, and I have the pleasure to introduce three wonderful poets who are with us today. We have Cathryn Hankla, who is the author of Not Xanadu. Then we have Danita Dodson, who is the author of Trailing the Azimuth. And we have José Araguz, who is the author of Rotura. And as usual, I'll be introducing these wonderful poets through their work, which I've had the joy to read. And I will begin with Cathryn Hankla, Not Xanadu, the book that we have on our shelves, and I encourage everybody to get it right after this reading. So in Not Xanadu, Cathryn reimagines for us what's impossible in this world, but maybe not in the next. Consider a ruffed grouse courting a lady, persistent and urgent in his affections, or being the broken egg and the living bird all at once, homing in a world of alternatives where endings are rewritten into new beginnings. Not Xanadu articulates what draws the poet's attention, what is and what appears to be transcendent, fragile, and mysterious in our day-to-day encounters. Cathryn, you're welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's great to read with Malaprops. Thanks to Mildred for pulling us all together today. Great to be here. So I'm going to start with the first poem in this book, Not Xanadu. I see my little angel twirling around over my shoulder, so I want to keep her happy today. If I am wrong, you don't want this poem. If I am wrong, then stop writing the other poem in your head as you read. I heard one on the radio, terrible, couldn't wait for it to be done. But in my head, as it droned on, a more perfect poem. If that poem said stick figures, my poem said stuck no more. If that poem said apricot or Massachusetts, my poem said Croatoan or sea otter. When that poem said, sometimes my microwave beeps a dire warning, this poem said, the odd whistles of which you've been complaining issue from my African gray. When the elevator doors opened in that poem on an unfamiliar floor, strangers waved an important piece of my mail. We would have gotten this back to you sooner, that poem said, but we were on a Caribbean cruise and our family members drunk too much. As you know, we don't drink. In this poem, we take the stairs, my statements delivered on time, and I rewrite the end over and over. My sister, Susan, who I hope is here today, said of this book, the best thing anybody's ever said to describe it, and that is that it's a little bit stand-up comedian and a little bit hopeless romantic. So I want to change that to hopeful romantic. This book also has a lot of different forms in it. And the next poem I'm going to read is a prose poem, so it appears in paragraphs on the page. It's called Heavy Door. The rustic door scraped across the marble floor, and beyond the foyer, she could see nothing. Feeling for a light switch and failing to find one, she pushed the wooden door closed with both hands. She inched forward until her sandal met the first step. Taking the next step and the next, she patted the wall, still searching, until a larger space, a landing, presented itself. Stairs turned in new directions, and she climbed without a modicum of light. The fault must be with her eyes, her rods, or was it cones, not making proper adjustments. Every darkness is a portal, she thought. 5 flights up, after missing the lock several times, at last her key fit, and she stepped inside her rented loft. A bit of indirect light and indecipherable music refracted through the window from the central shaft led to a small liquid square of night, yet not one star. Dear Sylvia, I wait for you here with my coffee cup and newspaper, and I watch the sea. The dolphins head up the beach, and in the evening scallop down. The force of their numbers through surf pushes toward the condo village, past gnashing mongrels gathered on shore. The dogs collect every morning to stalk grackles whose molting feathers stick out like charred trash or timbers. Even if these grackles were crash sites, only dogs would investigate. Sylvia, I watch the dolphins skimming by, undulating, their splendid continuum unbroken, water like silk shedding from their slick gray backs. Sylvia, I am still waiting for you to notice, turn toward my shining skin. I'm going to read a set of 4 poems, 4 sonnets. They're under the big heading, Running Commentary. And this is one of the poems in the book that are runner poems. There are several more runner poems in the book. So this is a set of sonnets. The first of them is Coal Train. That is C-O-A-L, coal train, not Coltrane. Sounds the same, but anyway. Overshadowed by engine 8157, hounding the historic rail walk, I am not bound for heaven. Neither am I every woman, it goes without saying. When to prefix man with woe indicates non-standard, questionable, in other words, nothing like the sun. I jog past heavily tagged cars loaded with deep pit coal that glitters like negative stars. Heroes, journey, quest, pattern. This is not that, ad infinitum. Bee's niece. Though of woe born, I am no thug. I do take issue with the questions swept beneath my rug, but no hugs, please. They only serve to stir my cauldron, bless my heart, and buzz my bonnet's bees. You tighten the twitch around my tender muzzle as you irrigate the blooming wound, commanding my hobbled hooves, be still. Do what you will in the name of healing. Raise the roof if you must. I once fell at your feet, pledged forever, best friend and helpmeet. My sparrow. Abrupt, break my reverie, sparrow. I step over you, dank bird with no blood, victim felled by invisible blows that decimate, yet leave no trace. Look to the cumulonimbus clouds, chiaroscuro balancing my face, and can you, having flown, name their strata? I draw a blank. You taught me how to tame my inner hurricane. And for your sake, I strangled not to blurt the brooding questions that tore a path from gut to this tired world, seeking answers forever untold. Cured. It felt like the world turned upside down and inside out, besieged by a medieval sword, piercing silence despite several lies unearthed. Your claims on crest and rights restored. No doubt my failure at repression helped. Yet speaking truth had no clout in our boudoir. A tie can be cut many times and mended before its final rend. The puny bird is resting now and quite cured. So growing up and still, I loved Motown music. So this is my little tribute to the Supremes. It's called Reverie. Three ladies in slick beehives are my love supreme. They sway the smooth hip, tip a gesture to the sky. Where did our love go? Burning, yearning, turning, hurts. You don't owe me the rest of, like silk in a knot. Ooh, baby, baby, your life. And zooming forward several decades. Transmogrify. Some claim Lady Gaga used to be a tiny baby. Some claim she used to be a housefly on the wall of witness. Follow the link. In the baby, there rose a cry that grew into Rapunzel-like, unbelievably strong woven locks or branches of a fatally flawed tree. Legends are for undying. All unlawful citizens were at one time scared. Their terror turned into terrifying. The trinkets of humanity jingle as they walk. No one is supposed to guess they bear resemblance, the uniformed and the man arrested. So I'm going to probably read just two more poems. This one is a pantoum, so you're going to hear a lot of repetition, and they're kind of maddening to write, but fun too. This one's called Awful Project. The tank rolled toward my house, reaching an impossible height. It drew closer and parked. A tiny man climbed out. Reaching an impossible height, my roof peak rose no taller. A tiny man climbed out who tumbled several stories. My roof peak rose no taller than war, misery, or the soldier who tumbled several stories to land upright on military boots. Than war, misery, or the soldier, there is no more awful project. To land upright on military boots is to find a certain order. There is no more awful project, I presumed, but wrongly, than to find a certain order. Tiny man stormed my kitchen, I presumed, but wrongly, to find someone to murder. Tiny man stormed my kitchen in his boots, toting loafers. To find something to murder him with, I rummaged cabinets. In his boots, toting loafers, tiny man sat down to change. And I'm going to close out with the title poem, Not Xanadu, which somewhat explains the title in one way. The other way is that it alludes to Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, Kubla Khan. Not Xanadu. Tulip poplar turning leaves over in the breeze, translucent mitts that know what it means to grow when no one is looking. Ostensibly, every leaf is a beginner, but that is enough to start the bubbling that will blossom and surround these leaves with color when the season breaks. Azure means the blue of sky, an enormous idea patched through. Forget me not, blue water, blue breath, bluebells along roadsides, dogs rolling in blue mysteries. So no, this is not Xanadu, but here, there is the blue. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I will have the pleasure to introduce Danita Dodson and her book, Trailing the Azimuth. Trailing the Azimuth pays homage to the path, the cycles of continuing presence of loved ones, and to finding the self again and again on an Appalachian trail made familiar by walking. Journeying homeward, the poet becomes the trail, the river that remembers salvation, the strong mountain woman resonant in the stories left behind. And so being Appalachian is not separate from what came before or after every organism that dwells and moves in this region, like the cardinal bird that speaks to the poet of bright promise, or the blue heron that offers assurance of something promised. Danita, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mildred, for that beautiful and gracious introduction. I am moved almost to tears. So I'm thrilled today to be in your presence and to be reading at Malaprop's and in the company of such fine poets as José and Cathryn. As a central trope woven into the fabric of my first collection, the azimuth is a navigation marker that aids travelers in pinpointing location and finding the way through life's wildernesses. A shout out today to my nephew who is in the audience and who gave me the title for the book, The Inspiration. The 7 poems I'll be reading today are all linked and connected to the theme of remembrance, which to me is a type of azimuth. I'll begin with 3 poems from the Tennessee Trails section, which maps the diverse ancestral histories of an East Tennessee home place. Blood ties and genealogical trails, though complex, are shining markers for identity and place. People of the legend. People of the legend, nomads of the myth, we remember our Melungeon ancestors who birthed the frontier in this place where mystery still is as dense as the fog upon the purple peaks of Powell Mountain, which we see rising parallel from our ridge. Already the day of our ancestors is fading, their voices melting into the gloaming, floating down winding mountain paths, dissolving before they reach the earth, raveled like the seams of homespun quilts, worn and battered by time and moths. Just as the jade glow of summer falls fairly to October frost, crushed by the tramping of boots on the route that brought them to these hills, our ancestors' stories and their steps will die with us. We fear, so we must speak them. They once burrowed through the wilderness, settling Newman's Ridge before Tennessee was a name on a map, trusting the healing source of woodland herbs and cool streams They were called to a remote landscape that would be their Eden, a hilltop sanctuary. They found it with many inborn compasses, listening to the Portuguese mariners in their souls that embraced languid waters, heeding the Moorish poets in their hearts that named them singers of garden ghazals, Sephardic, African, Turkish, Powhatan. Perhaps we are all, or perhaps none of these. Though our ancestral blood can be traced, reflected DNA paths of homelands far, the truth of our lore is nestled in the graves, shrouded by the vines of rambling plants. Scholars have flocked to our hills, blazing their own roots, writing our blood in books, seeking the history rewritten in our veins. Still, our origins are supposed, invented. Yet we walk forward, seeking the sunrise, not willing to be marginalized by mystery, embracing anew our multiracial heritage as the descendant people of the legend, suffused in long, winding trails. I dedicated this book to my father, though he passed away in April. He had the chance to read and enjoy the poems. And in light of his recent death, this next poem bears new and even more special meaning for me. And I offer it today as a tribute. Patchwork of Remembrance. Memories like homemade quilts made for everyday use from necessity and love spread benevolently over my being. Each stitch a trail to who I am, a vein of life offering warmth on wintry nights, pulsing calico sunniness to my awakening. The entwined laughter and tears of the years smell pervasively of the cedar box love that protects the embroidery of smiles, that preserves the basting of heartaches, a patchwork of knowing, of acceptance. Familial ties, thick and thin, topsy-turvy, blood and water, flannel and silk, all are sewn into the fabric of ordinary days, gathered both by accident and by fate, shaped by the needle that sometimes jabs, tugged by the thread that always ties. I'm blessed to have been surrounded by strong women in my family, and I can't imagine I would be the person I am today without their influence. So this next poem is about seeing my own reflection in my memories of them. Mountain Woman in 4 Seasons. Watching the purple horizon lift upward like a cathedral blessing in the loveliest time of the year, I've seen my sister standing regal in her green summer dress, country girl with smoky mountain eyes, who fingers the delicate flowers that stick to her skin like Monet impressions as she swims seas of woodland flocks. And often when in this cool valley, I tilt my head upward to the mountains and feel still the fervent comfort of Mama's golden leaf arm as I look deeply into the autumn fury of her protective gazes, angry at the hide-bound ones who jeer at her hillbilly girl. There are times too that Mama is quite near me, living on borrowed time in the Appalachian woodlands, with her winter white chill and fallen hair, shaking me with grandmotherly urgency, calling me away from diamond dreams. In her bare tree limbs, I notice a strength more forceful than iron. I've watched these, my women kin, these stalwart mountains, as I walk down dirt paths seeking my bearings. But right now, I see myself as I stand where the spring stream gleams, my reflection looming wider and taller than it ever is without the hills behind me. Of course, the city mirrors catch me too, but they just don't seem to recognize the power of a mountain woman. My archaeological excavations in the Southwest have given me the chance to see how pottery and poetry are kindred mediums in recording and remembering place, and people. The voices of pots. As she looks upon the converging paths of Santa Fe, weaving back 1,000 years, she sifts through the conqueror's blood and once again finds her primeval voice. The clay mother guiding her hands as she holds a burnishing stone, smelling the woods, hearing the birds, feeling the coolness of air after the rain, then the resonant warmth of sun rising. She feels all these things in the clay, sensing and unfolding braided stories about Corn Mother, reweaving magic in a Santo Domingo geometry of lines that will make new rhyme and reason from clay dug, dried, crushed, and sifted to remove contaminants and violence. Adding temper with water, she mixes in peace, then kneads the earthen dough. This pot will be like a newborn person, made from the earth, the core of life, becoming a treasured part of a family, then aging and returning to the soil to speak in discarded pottery sherds, fragments that will tell a larger truth like the storytellers testify. We all are the clay we knead and shape. We all are the earth and the paths we walk. We all are the stories we leave behind. My deep connection to my home places inspired me to notice both the uniqueness and the kinship of other places, as I aspired to show with the previous poem. And this next poem was written about an experience I had in Guatemala during Semana Santa, our Holy Week, a time when I was awed by the beauty of unity that I still believe is possible in humanity. Iglesia de la Merced. On Maundy Thursday, I stood in the center of a teeming crowd in the cool cathedral, the smell of Caroso pods filling the space, where I mused mindfully, a window suddenly opening in the core of my being. I joined the hushed throng that undulated like waves of one unified tide, fellow peregrinos, walking pilgrims on the way, moving together toward the adorned altar, our magnet, awaiting just a brief moment to glimpse the mother and her son in all their glory, visible representations of some great pain and some deep hope. When I reached the front, I was submerged in cleansing tears, a fountain in harmony with the floating scent of fresh vegetables and fruits placed neatly around the sanctum. As a border for the huerto, a sawdust garden, a Guatemalan Gethsemane in vibrant hues, a fragrant prayer for good harvest anew. With humility and diversity, the people had reposed also themselves, their toils, the fruits of all their countless laborers, at the feet of another sufferer. With no florid tapestries to place properly in the winsome path of the sanctuary, they had scattered mere plants and seeds. They had no rubies, so they gave jocotes. They had no pearls, so they gave cebollas. They had no topaz, so they gave piñas. Gleaning the earth to find perfect locums for the gems they had placed in his crown, they'd fixed more jewels in their own. Several poems in the book are meditations upon the healing power of the divine, as I showed with the previous poem, but I also see this healing power from God reflected in nature. The unadorned tree. Obedience means I will follow you into the forest and again bring myself closer to the particular tree you compel me always to observe. Though it is not beautiful as far as trees are considered so, it lures me now and then to bow at its endurance in defiance of time and circumstance. But sometimes it just draws me gently to the wispy neediness in its branches, through my own tendency to lean upon something disheveled and obscured. And every time I'm guided there, To the roots of this scraggy survivor, I am tapped ever so lightly in the heart by blessing, and my breath lengthens. Knowing deep within that this gaunt tree is a mirror of some pure and basic truth, speaking a language meek in its story of both the earth and me. And the final poem I'll read, written at the beginning of the pandemic, comes from a reflection on how poetry itself is a type of azimuth that ensures that people and our memories of them don't get lost, don't die a second more final time. Casualty of Spanish flu. Encased in an oval on the wall, sepia image in brown marble tin, with handsome face, perfect hair, and hands set solidly upon legs, you do not disclose your fate. I inherited your dignified portrait from your daughter, my grandmother, who never quite recovered the fact that you left her. She not grasping as a 4-year-old girl that you would not return to rejoice the day. You walked one November hour, your birthday, out into the cold, cold rain, not seeking gifts yourself, but longing to give the milk of life to your darling wife and children. As you struggled hard to breathe in the icy deluge, ignoring a cough because you were strong and stocky, having only walked 31 years on the solid earth that you had farmed, you carried the battered milk pail, swinging it gently with resolve on a path you were destined to take, finding the cow upon the mountain. A day later, the pneumonia set in, and you could not possibly know that you were soon to be another casualty of the pandemic of 1918. But your face, we reclaim, recall, retell today, knowing that to us, your descendants, you will never, ever be simply another number. Thank you.
Thank you, Danita. And now I will introduce our last poet, José Araguz, who is going to read from his book, Rotura. And we have all these 3 books at Malaprop, so after the reading, make sure you get a copy. In Rotura, José has done with words what other inspiring works of art have done for him. That is, to not just like the art, but do something. In many ways, Rotura is a response to that call, rousing forms of expression in language, containment, drainage, and flow, as in rivers running to ocean and not lost, being a question asking itself, running to become air in motion, if not heard, still speaking and listening to moths, watchful birds and wind, finding what the face makes in light, in shadow, in myth, in truth, in the great darkness that spills into the speaker, asking to be held, and what it's like in the end to hold another person's darkness out of care and familiar longing. José, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Thank you, Mildred. And thank you to Malaprops and for the lovely readings we just heard from Cathryn and Danita. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be able to read with y'all. Just gonna start with probably the first poem from this manuscript that got written back in 2016. I think the prompt was an invitation to write a letter to America. So I did my own kind of thing. This poem is in 3 sections. And it's called American Studies. My wife tells me of reading the Dear America books as a child, those stories told via the diaries of young women who lived during difficult times in American history. In these stories filled with suffering were the facts behind the suffering. Her favorite involved the RMS Titanic, the unsinkable ship that sank. I asked if trying to imagine what it looked like was what captivated. And she says no, says only one book led to another until she realized she could never see it nor escape it. After the election, my friend explains he feels he could manage here, but not his children. He explains he spoke to their school director, who comforted by talking about police presence. But if there's police, he asks, before anything happens, what will happen when something does? American algebra, everything is X until proven Y. Dear America, if X represents what my friend feels thinking about the police, what language do you imagine he worries his children speaking publicly, and what language are we speaking now? Show your work. Another friend writes, here's a verse I think about a lot, and maybe the mirror of the world will clear once again. She shares she's been sick since the election, as I've been. I imagine our voices trying to commiserate between coughs. In physics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. What American physics happens here as I read and hear her voice behind the verse she sent? Are you, dear America, afraid as I am that our voices, that our faces will no longer be there when the mirror clears? Tripped up there at the end. And I think part of it is reading from this latest book. It's been fun, kind of, because a lot of the book deals directly with the 2016 election of Donald Trump. But these themes and the aftermath is for years with us, right? And I'm also thinking of how, like, even the way the police show up in the book. I mean, the themes are refreshed and the themes stay the same, and the world, I mean, we keep trying to do good in the world, right? That is the hope. Anyway, gonna move from that to talking trash about T.S. Eliot. It's a conversation, really. This next poem, I think I talk more trash about T.S. Eliot in my teaching than I do in this poem, but this poem is called Four Dirges, and it's kind of in conversation with T.S. Eliot's book, The Four Quartets. And specifically, there's this line that stuck with me back when I first read that. I mean, because it's a great poem, but he's got these lines at the beginning of The Dry Salvages. I don't know about gods, he says, but I think the river is a strong brown god, sullen, untamed, and intractable. And that kind of always stuck with me. So these four dirges, 4 parts, and each one takes kind of an homage to my hometown, home area, South Texas, Corpus Christi, Matamoros, Mexico, the world I'm from. This first dirge is called Rio Grande, Rio Bravo dirge. Thomas, it's true, you don't know about gods beaten and worn like the space left between paired jigsaw puzzle pieces, where a child has tried to force the wrong piece in. You might have known about gods who linger, who know lightning bolts, who know bargains and carry swords, but I think you lack the capacity to notice their lack of capacity to harbor and be a hand to shade our eyes. Shaded now, you don't know and died not knowing the slosh of gods and the dark gleam of gods that reflect clean off badges, hot overpaid hearts. This river god who rears and waits in place like a door left ajar, God that moves and darkens. This is not a being of your thoughts. Water dirge. Tom, do you know that before boundaries were decided between men separating Mexico and the United States, there was water? Before the city lights made us forget the stars, and before the desert was made a road, and before people crammed into trucks and were called cargo, called nothing back there, officer, there was water. Do you think water is an argument waged between two gods? Think where I believe water is blood spilt between two gods. Do you think, as I do, that I might mean split and not spilt? Do you know much about the silence, so much like a river, when I've been seen as sullen, untamed, and intractable? Nueces River dirge. Tommy, Is your strong brown God also this chosen river split from brother by distance and legislation, river that empties into Corpus Christi Bay? No, I know you spoke of the Ohio, and I know that river too, but what would you call the hard waters of my home city? What blessings for us who offer up nothing but faces can you think of? What looks back when we hold water in our hands and wait a moment of dark mirror, that we are then made in the image of what we cannot utter, that we are lost in clouded lifelines as we stand outside a door we've had no hand in making. Corpus Dirge, December 2016. T. When the water was contaminated in Corpus, I did not consider gods, did not know them or think them able to help my family, who already had bottled water in bulk. My mother, who made sure her sons didn't drink from the tap, who attempted to shower with bottled water a few times, only to have to give up, her arms giving out after double shifts of work. When the water was tainted, I took the time to look up maps, traced by zip code the neighborhoods cut off from water, noted that where they lived, my family would live without service for some time. Same for the neighborhoods we used to live in, from Leopard to Greenwood, and yet water had been restored to areas I never saw until I had started driving and would detour through ritzy residentials, or so they seemed at 16. When it was tainted, I knew water had given off light like roads made of glass before I was born. Knew that water bore and took in all that fell long before I had fallen off the map I traced over, trying to think and find any thin reassurance. When the water was tainted, it remained water and would remain water. And all the words wearing down in meaning are my family history, are part of my story. Mr. Eliot, before I was born, you wrote about a strong brown God, but what are gods when there is water in rivers who have nothing to do with what isn't already part of them? If the river is within us, then why did I fear it killing those I cared for? Why do gods beyond belief, knowledge, and thought scrawl out of me, awkward, reverent, and dying? All right, I'll read two shorter pieces now. This next poem, when I say a house without electricity, I really mean it. I lived a year in a house without electricity with a friend of mine, and it's a long story. I've only got like 12 to 15 minutes, but ask me about it later. Let's see. There's also, I borrow a couple lines here. One is from Robert Frost, and the other one is from a lesser known poet named Christopher Morley. And the line's cool. The line is, since men learned to print, no night is wholly black. And I found it as a dedication to a library, which I thought it was so fitting. I'm like, what a cool line. And I later found out the poet. Anyway, this is called Night Matter. In a house without electricity, what matters is having clean paper and enough light for words. Crouched at the window by the street lamp's light, I write. When the light clicks off, ask my hand if it matters. Even when I can't tell what word lies at my fingers, I know the force and heat is my matter. My eyes make out the paper as a glow registered by some animal sense that makes it matter. The night sky fills with bits of shell and bone, or so I write in ink, in night matter. Since men learned print, no night is wholly black. Since I learned night, my print is holy matter. Frost spoke of being acquainted with the night. Having words with it, neither wrong nor right, is another matter. You who read and move on to other matters, the night knows who between us must do the dying. So this next poem is I always tell myself I'm not going to write another Selena poem. It's about Selena Quintanilla Perez, the Tejano singer who is from my part of the world and was actually from my hometown, and she died there too. She was murdered when I was like in 7th grade. And so every couple of years, a Selena poem pops out, and I'm like, oh, this is the last one I can't keep. But it's the same thing. Like I have poems about my father that keep popping out, even though I didn't know him, and he died young. So you know, you got to write what comes. So anyway, this was the one that made it into this book. This is called Selena, A Study of Recurrence and Worry. Somebody died and it's okay to be Mexican. No, really, this is good. I was worried nobody would understand what it means to come from a city named after the recurring body of a martyr. No, really, this is good. I worried a whole generation of young women from a city named for wounds and resurrection would suffer themselves to be stilled and lost. Now I worry a whole generation of friends close their fists around empty beer cans and walk out the door to become lost, distilled memories. You would think no one would sing here again, that with beer cans in their fists, mothers would tell stories about a ghost appearing should you sing here in this city, should you ever go on stage. A whole generation of mothers telling stories where not a ghost but a microphone vanishes directly below a spotlight that burns anyone who walks on stage. Different moon in a different sky where it is always night. See, a whole city vanishes below the spotlight of my erratic memory. Corpus Christi, my imagination paints you as an indifferent sky where night after night we tell stories about who we were. You are more than my erratic memory and imagination, more than the name of a wounded returned body. When at night I tell stories about Selena, I know that it is more complicated than the name on a statue, more complicated than somebody died, and it's okay to be Mexican. I know life is more complicated than anyone can understand or hope to become. All right, and unintentionally, completely unintentionally, I'm ending on the last poem I wrote. So I started with the first poem I wrote that ended up in this book, and I worked on it shortly, like after Trump got elected. But I didn't want the book itself, Rotura, to be kind of like bound by that, right? I mean, we were always afraid of being dated in life and in our art, and it also felt very unproductive to like be like, oh, I'm gonna chronicle, because everybody could write their own post 2016 election book and now a post-pandemic book, right? But like, what was really in the air? So the book that came out, Rotura means to break, to rupture, and it's his meditation around the election and also around my life and different things that are broken. And so this poem that I'm going to read is the last one I wrote. It's called Certain Rivers, and it has an epigraph from a poem by Czesław Miłosz, the poem that this line is from, well, I'll read the line first. The line is, when it hurts, we return to the banks of certain rivers, which is such a killer line. And it's from a poem called I Sleep a Lot. And I'm like, how do you go from I sleep a lot, so like quotidian, conversational, to when it hurts, we return to the banks of certain rivers? But he does it, like, and I think that's cool. So anyway, the sequence is called Certain Rivers. When a river is crossed, how many families hold their breath? Breath-made rivers that they cannot keep inside, one after another, the only thought, adelante. Later, with children, with hours of work wearing down the body, these breath-made rivers run through dreams and stories. They tell their children not to voice. Small faces hold still while questions begin to course and shadows dam the back of the throat. I have made a myth of our river. In telling the myth, one river becomes many rivers. The one my mother crossed, lost in the one I cross now in ink. You can't step into the same river twice, but you can try. The sound will grow, will lap and splash, sound of displacement, sound of will, of wanting in your mind, sound of steps going nowhere. Water knows how to be lost, has a need for it, just watch. The rain is all scramble and clearing of tracks. Watch a napkin over a puddle, how water goes for broke to be lost, clings, rises, soaks the fabric, pretending part, like it does in clouds that grow, give, and clear. Shadow is a kind of water, in that it knows one way to be lost. Just wait, it says, just wait. Water knows its way to truth. You can see what lies at the bottom of rivers. You can wash away the dirt to see your hands again. Water is then not the truth, but a way to it. Shadow then is not a lie, but something also passing over truth. Down the street at noon, you cannot look around without seeing others making the same strained face. A country also knows its way to truth, but can choose to pass over it. In this country of water and shadow, truth is strained from our faces. My mother turns to water on the phone. The river of her voice carries the years between us, years where I have strained to catch something of our changing faces. The river of her voice is a kind of truth I know. I see what lies at the bottom of these years. I wash away the dirt and see my hands tremble. Water knows how to be lost, has a need for it, but it cannot choose. A river runs to ocean and is not lost, just ocean. A river runs dry and is lost, you think, but later it returns, and only then do you ask, what is a river? But never answer, happy to have the river. People know how to be lost to others. Crossing rivers helps. People know, but they must choose, and even then they are not lost to themselves. Mother, you brought me with you over water, over a way to truth, over the distance of your shadow, and in shadows now we wait for the other to call. Sometimes she calls in tears, and like an earthworm when the rain comes and fills its burrow, a part of me works itself out to the surface to breathe. I can hear the water in her words, flooding sentences of love and regret cloud what I know how to say. Whatever actual clouds in the distance between her and I rearrange as she continues to break and give herself over to the 10 or 15 minutes it takes to grieve that one cannot grieve. No hay tiempo, tus hermanos, esta casa nunca está limpia, ¿no ves? Cuida bien esa niña tuya, lo siento, no hablamos suficiente, deberíamos, gente muere, ¿sabes? I know. This voice from other nights, other cold moments when I've stopped in my life to listen, drummed out from the dirt of where I live and made to gleam like rain and worms, glass bottle shards. The hard face of a television clicked off to leave a house quiet, but for the pleading half whisper, half snore of a woman with no time to grieve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose, for that reading. And I would like to have a few questions from the audience, our wonderful listeners out there. In the meantime, I'll use this time to ask the poets why poetry and what does poetry do for you, since some of you work in other art forms as well.
I think I misunderstood the question, Mildred, but I'll just go with it anyway. I think poetry is a way of processing the world and also preserving something. I think both of those things are happening, and also I don't think you go to poetry unless you really want to push language in a certain way and also explore language, because poetry is not transparent to content the way some prose is. It returns us to the words themselves. And I think poets write poems that they want to be read again and again. So you don't get everything all at once just by reading the poem once, or for our reading it to you once. There's more there.
I'll go next. Poetry to me is much like an invitation to some deep, beautiful, enlightening, transformative place. I feel that way because I have clear memories of my first the first poem I ever heard, which was Robert Frost's The Pasture. And I was 6 years old in first grade, and I distinctly remember the teacher sharing this poem, and I was hooked. And the words were, I'm going to clean the pasture spring. I shan't be gone long, you come too. And it was, and I have become a nature poet, much like Frost, but it's more than being drawn to, not like Frost, but I aspire to be. But it's more than being invited into the lens of re-seeing the natural world. It's to go into a deeper place. And it's for the reader an invitation, but it's also for, I feel like for the poet, to me, an invitation to, as I'm writing, to rediscover some things about myself.
Awesome. No, I think what I would add to that, I'm gonna go in two directions with this, but which is, I mean, how we work, right? It's how I end up using in my teaching a lot of binaries, but you know, it's never hard and fast. It's not one way or another. There's a whole spectrum. It's very fluid, which is a great time to say Happy Pride to anybody watching this or out there celebrating. Happy Pride Month, y'all. And what's it called? There's the airy kind of high-minded poet in me says that why poetry? I don't know. It's more about like what can I do for poetry? I feel like the way poetry has come into my life. There's this great essay by Alan Peleas Lopez where he talks about the word Latinx and how the word X, like the letter X, he identifies 4 wounds of the marginalized experience of being Latinx, and one of them is inarticulation. And I think as my own marginalized experience has shown, like there's a lot of inarticulation growing up, where there's the inarticulation of being 4 years old and suddenly politicized by being at the grocery store and being, you know, mistreated or looked at uglily or treated uglily in public, and suddenly I have to deal with politics. Like, why are they looking at us like that, right? And I don't have those words. Or we have those big experiences where even though I know 2 languages, it's not enough words. And so in the face of this inarticulation, poetry helps me find the words to articulate that inarticulation. So it's still inarticulate. Like we're still going to have more interesting questions than we do answers in our lives. But yeah, poetry does definitely like helps me serve that a little bit in that part of myself and reassure myself in a way. So it creates those kinds of spaces on a more practical level. So here's the other side of it. Why poetry? Because it's where I started. Or I mean, everything Cathryn and Danita were pointing to, like this fascination with language. One of the earliest experiences I had with poetry was learning how to do the 5-7-5 haiku in 2nd grade. At which point I was writing about all the big important things in my life, like Ninja Turtles, vampires, ghosts. And then that slowly evolved into this kind of mentality, especially in grad school, where there was all this competitiveness. And I was in the face of it. I kept thinking to myself, my mantra was like, it's not about my poetry, it's about poetry. Poetry is what matters. And so that's what I mean by like serving it. And it's a practice, and we're never going to be any better than our next poem usually. But yeah, I started writing in journals. I've been writing in journals my whole life. And so a lot of my creative nonfiction, a lot of my short stories all start in these notebooks. So, and in lines usually. So poetry is just how I found my way into, being the kid in the garage apartment on the floor writing in the little spaces. So yeah, and then everything else I learned, but poetry I didn't have to learn. Maybe that's one way to put it. I'll stop.
Thank you so much. I think that's a perfect place to end. And I would like to give thanks to you, poets, Cathryn Hankla. Thank you for being with us today. Danita Dodson and José Araguz. Thank you so much for blessing us with your work. And be with us next Poetrio reading, which is going to happen in July. And it's going to be our first Poetrio in person. So while we give thanks to Zoom to enable us to still hear poetry, I hope the next time we have you, you'll be with us in person. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.